So hopefully it's helpful to you. And again, at the end, there is a Q&A. So try to think of some questions for us to answer for you. And so we really have a diverse panel here. And I want us all to kind of know who the people are first. So you guys all get this flyer from Jennifer, this flyer here, because it kind of tells who we are. So Jennifer should have emailed you all the flyer, and if not, then maybe you can take a picture of it. You can go to Tonya in the back, take a picture of the flyer, and you'll know who all of us are, and you'll know kind of what we do, which will be kind of helpful when we start talking about what it is that we do. So, also, we have, for the first 50 of you, we have boba and pork buns. So hopefully you got a ticket, and at the end of all of this, then you'll be able to go to the back and you'll get a boba and pork buns. In addition, some of us might be able to stay behind a little bit and chat. So if you have questions that you want to ask us, just feel free to come up. Or maybe we'll kind of mingle in the back and then we can chat about whatever it is you guys want. In addition, because we only have 45 minutes for the panel, if you guys have any questions about anything, feel free to email us. Jennifer also has all of our emails, and she'll send those out to you so that you guys can have if you guys want to have a further conversation, we can do that. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists here. First, I'm Matthew Fong. I'm a hospice physician at Asian Network. So I work with people who are kind of in the end of life, and I'm going to be talking about a variety of topics related to healthcare today. So if you have questions about like being a doctor, being a nurse, being a dentist, just let me know, and then we can talk about that. To my right here, we have Jenny. She is a clinical team lead, social worker, medical social worker at Asian Network, and she's also in private practice. And then we have Vic Young, who is the CFO of Activa, and he was a former audit partner at PwC. Next to him, we have David Zhang, who is a director at Silver Lake in private equity. And next to him, we have Mike Shea, who was president at Fund Capital and worked in venture capital. So we'll try to explain to you what some of these terms mean if you don't already know. And also, when we stop for questions, feel free to ask us anything as well. So first, let me start with Mike. Can you explain to us what a venture capitalist does and what the day-to-day work experience of a venture capitalist is like?
Sure. So venture capital, maybe the best way to explain it is when Mark Zuckerberg first came up with the idea for Facebook, or Steve Jobs first came up with the idea of an Apple computer, or Larry Page and Sergey Brin came up with the idea for a search engine called Google. All of them started with basically an idea. And this was an idea of a business that they wanted to build. So they needed money to create all these great companies and to hire people, to pay rent, to buy equipment. And so the money that they first raised came from venture capitalists. It's basically a group of investors who specifically work with entrepreneurs in helping them create new businesses from concept. And then work with these entrepreneurs as they build these companies over time to continue to give them more money, also to give them contacts, give them relationships with other corporations so that they can then become large businesses. So I've been doing that for about 35 years. And typically, what's exciting about venture capital is that I get the opportunity to work with really interesting people with exciting ideas and help them create companies. So most of the day is to meet with entrepreneurs. They come into the office or they come on Zoom and they make a presentation about new concepts and ideas that they have. And we basically have interact with questions and answers. We kind of review their plans. And if it looks really interesting, then we sit down and we figure out a way to give them capital so that they can build their businesses. And in return, we get shares of their company. And so that's essentially the business of venture capital and also what goes on in a venture capitalist life.
Thanks so much, Mike. And you know, if a high school student or a college student wanted to get into that field, how would you suggest they do that?
Well, it's a very small industry, and so not many opportunities come up every year. So unlike a lot of other industries like banking or accounting or consulting, where people regularly come on campus to recruit their next group of employees, most venture capital firms only hire very few number of people. So it's a matter of really getting yourself out there. And so the best way that I have experienced, because I've hired people for our firm, is basically to ask others in the industry who they would recommend. So the best way to get into this industry is to really just get to know as many people in venture capital as you can. And typically, the best way to do that is after you graduate from college, to actually go to the alumni database of your college and look up anyone who's in venture capital and get in touch with them and say, look, I'm interested in an informational interview. I'd love to hear more about your experience as a venture capitalist. Get yourself out there, meet them, so that when an opportunity does come up, that they will remember you. So networking is really the best way in a relatively small industry.
Before I move on, one more question. Why would somebody in high school or college want to go into venture capital?
Well, if you like to work with entrepreneurs and really help people build companies, that's really what's exciting about it. Build the next Facebook, the next Google, the next Apple, and really work with very creative people and be able to be part of that team. So all of you, are part of Asian Youth Services. You help out other people. It's no different. You're helping out entrepreneurs, and you're using your leadership skills in order to enable them to create great businesses.
So I just wanted to check in. Does that make sense to everyone, what he does? Does anybody have any specific question right now for Mike? Go for it.
Yeah, so career-wise, like day-to-day, what is your day-to-day look like?
It's mostly, so usually it's inbound projects that come to us. So we are typically screening a number of people who either contact us, send us business plans, call us, and we will then decide, okay, here are some really interesting entrepreneurs, and then we will respond to them by inviting them to have a Zoom call, come into our office, and then basically have an interaction where we get to know them better. We're looking for people who have really great, interesting ideas, who are really passionate about doing it, because it's a lot of work to be an entrepreneur. You really have to be committed. And they also have skill sets, so typically some work experience in the industry that they're trying to really innovate in, or be disruptors to. If they fill those boxes, then we want to then really kind of help them even develop and become part of the business.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Moving to David, similar to Mike, I know that you're in finance and you work in private equity. So can you talk about what private equity is and also what your firm Silver Lake does?
Yeah, happy to. So I like to think of private equity as the less sexy cousin to venture capital. Mike works with a lot of the exciting companies early in their life, right? So you're dealing with a lot of dreamers who have big ideas, who are in that moment where they're trying to figure out how to get there. And you go through a lot of highs and lows as you do that. Private equity is similar in that we're investors, we buy investments in equity stakes in companies, but we tend to invest when a company is already established. There's less highs and lows, but hopefully a little bit more of a steady kind of over long period of time in funds. The main difference I'd say also is, whereas venture capital, the way you motivate the entrepreneur to continue to develop and kind of create their businesses is you take a small stake in that company. So you invest maybe 10%, 20% of the ownership of that company. Whereas in private equity, we tend to buy the whole company, or at least the majority of the company. That's probably the really short version of it. The analogy I like to draw to just make it really make sense for everyone is almost like buying that in a house. So if you look at a house that you think is maybe a little bit undervalued for whatever reason, it's cheap in the neighborhood, you can buy it. But not only can you buy it, because it's a house, it's a real asset, it's kind of developed, it's got a, unlike a starting kind of company, it's got something that people can believe in. You can actually take on a loan, a mortgage. So just like that in private equity, you can also lend against the company that we would buy. Then, just like a house, you might try to improve the house once you own it. So you might renovate the house, you might apply some levels of paint, you might do any number of different things to try to increase the value of the house. And then after some period of time, you then sell the house, and hopefully for a higher price. And in private equity, it's kind of the same thing. You buy a company, it already exists, you fund it with some level of debt, so you're not investing as much kind of actual dollars. And I realize this is probably too nuanced to have to answer questions on this later, it's useful. But as you then grow the company and improve the company under your ownership, you then, after some period of time, sell it for a higher price point. So you make money. We do some cool things. So Silver Lake, the firm that I work in specifically, we're a firm that focuses on technology companies and technology-enabled companies. Technology-enabled is a very, very wide band of companies. So one of the companies that we own, for example, is UFC, the MMA fighting league. So I don't know if anyone watches that, but some of the cool things about private equity is because we're investing in such large companies, we get to deal with some pretty interesting people, but also sometimes we get to deal with pretty interesting kind of strategic questions about whole industries, but that I can get into later on if it's useful.
Thanks so much, David. Does that make sense to everybody, what David does? Does anybody have any questions about that or need a clarification? Cool, okay. Thanks so much, David. Let's move to Jenny. A little bit different. She works more with people. So Jenny, can you tell us a little bit about what you do as a medical social worker and also in private practice?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Janny. I'm a medical social worker and I'm a psychotherapist with my own private practice. How many people here know what a social worker is or what a social worker does?
Work with people.
That's right. Work with people, handle people. That's about right. I think when I was in high school, I had no idea. And it wasn't until I went to a dinner party that this woman told me that she was a social worker. And she was like, girl, social workers are everywhere. They work at schools, hospitals, they work in prisons, they work at agencies with border control, they work with lawyers. So it was amazing what I learned about the role of a social worker. As a medical social worker, I, like Dr. Fong, am working with patients in hospice during the last 6 months of their lives, or in home health where there's been a medical crisis, some sort of medical event. And what's really special about working at Asian Network is we've likely worked with some of their families. We're here in the heart of Oakland, and we work specifically with the Asian population. So we really serve patients and families who have our cultural heritage, who have been through so many traumatic things and changes. So being a medical social worker is really understanding that context and supporting families through the dying process, making sure that they have the supports they need, whether that's resources or connecting them with the right community groups to get them to baseline or get them to where they need to be in the next stage of their health goals.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That's awesome. Why might somebody want to be a social worker who is from high school or going to college? Why should they choose that field?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think at different stages of your life, you actually might find that you're open to different things that you want to do. Maybe when you were younger, you have this career in mind, and then sometime in your life, you might pivot and do something completely different. If you are engaged with what's happening today, politically, socially, you're paying attention, if you want to make a difference in this world, if you love working with people, being a social worker is for you. And one of the amazing things about being a social worker is you can work with so many different types of population. You can work with kids. In the past, I've worked with foster kids. You can work with adults, you can work in the medical field, and you can change at any stage too. So you can always take this career path and do something different if you wanted to. In private practice, I'm also a psychotherapist, so I get to build a very close and unique relationship with my clients, working through mental health crisis, anxiety, or depression. And a lot of that stuff is really relevant today. I know that with how much we're using technology, with the way things are moving in AI direction, the world can be pretty scary when it comes to climate crisis as well. So these are things that we want people to understand. You don't have to go through it alone. And being a social worker is somebody who can support somebody through that process.
Thank you so much, Amy. Yeah, go ahead.
So you said you were a psychotherapist, right? Are there any tips you would give for like aspiring counselors or therapists?
That's such a great question. I think if you're really interested, a good place to start is maybe an internship. So even if you are in your undergraduate program, you can pursue a degree in psychology, a minor in psychology. You can ask to intern in an office like that so you get a sense of what it's like to work in that career path. I'm also happy to talk to you afterwards if you want to hear a little bit more about what the internship experience could look like. When I was interning, I interned at a cancer center, and that's what eventually got me into the medical field.
Thank you for the question. Great, and let's move to Victor. Vic, I know you have a pretty long and illustrious career. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of what the beginning of your career was like, and maybe what the CPA is?
I'm not going to say anything until I get my vote. It's probably not of this generation, but being an accountant in the old days, they referred to us as the bean counters. So a career in accounting basically is where you are, or you become an expert in financial record keeping. So if you think of it personally, most of us have different degrees of record keeping. You may only look at your bank balance at the end of the month and the size of your credit card. But when you're in a business, you have to keep track of the money that is going through the business. How much you're making, how much you're paying out, how much you pay your employees. And at the end of the day, you produce a financial statement. That financial statement is useful to you as the owner, president of the company. But as you become a large enterprise, then obviously there are stakeholders, and that includes the shareholders, the bankers, because you may have borrowed money, and we've heard about how people invest in companies and so forth. So a career in accounting, for me anyway, started probably when I was in high school. And two things happened. My oldest brother was an accountant, and he engaged in slave labor, meaning me, and helped him when he set up his accounting practice. So I learned how to keep records, how to post transactions in a ledger, and so forth. Back in the day, my high school, Oakland High, offered as an elective a bookkeeping class. So I decided to take that only because I thought it would be an easy A after I had worked 3 summers for my older brother. Accounting is a pretty broad business opportunity, I'll call it. I've already mentioned that an accountant could be a payroll person, a payroll clerk. An accounting person is the chief financial officer of a large company. An accounting person is a CPA, which stands for Certified Public Accountant. And so you will see accountants in various sectors, not only in business, but in the community and government. The IRS employs accountants. So does the Treasury Department. But most of them are in corporations, and it can be large or small. I chose to go into public accounting, which are accounting firms that are experts in any number of areas. I chose the auditing side, and auditing is where, as a financial accounting expert, you go in and inspect the books and the financial statements of companies who are your clients. Other CPAs are tax experts. So they are the ones that help you prepare your income tax returns, or in the case of, again, larger enterprises, corporate taxes, or in the not-for-profit sector. And then there are other specialties like consulting, which you get into financial systems, and these days with all the computers and everything on the web and so forth, there's a whole variety of financial applications that you could get into. But a CPA really is a licensed specialist. And so it's like an attorney where they have to pass the bar exam. If you want to be a CPA and practice in public, then you must pass the CPA exam. That's a pretty rigorous exam. Probably take it in the Q&A session as to what that might involve.
Thanks so much, Dick. And why would somebody who's in high school or college want to go towards their path to become an accountant?
Well, with AI today, you'll never know, but accounting has proven over the years to be a very steady employment opportunity. It could be very good financially, depending on which sector you go into. So just the fact that there are always jobs and they are always looking for qualified accountants in various sectors of society, that's one reason. The rest of it would have to be tied to your skill sets and your personality, I guess. Accounting is very rigorous, and back in my high school days, everybody said that if you were going to go into accounting, you had to be good at math. To me, that wasn't totally irrelevant, because any of us are pretty good at math, and you're just adding 1 and 1. But I think to be organized, and accounting can involve very long hours, so you've heard it all before. I think multitasking becomes a very important skill. But a lot of people don't understand that. I think being an accountant also means that you have to have pretty good communication skills, because either you're dealing with your bosses, the board of directors, or if you're practicing in public, your clients. So being there with them, and that's kind of what your work day or your work environment is like. If you're a tax CPA, you're probably in your office. But for me, in public accounting, I was always out of the office. I was at my clients, traveling, doing a lot of things to do the auditing that I was asked to do.
Thanks so much, Rich. Really appreciate that. I'd like to move on to our two people at the end there. We have Zian Chung, who works at Amazon AWS, is also a co-founder of Asians Are Strong, and is also on the board of the Red Cross. And then we also have Tian Zha, who spent many years working at Google, and is also the CEO and co-founder of a health AI startup called MDAI. So really appreciate you two for joining us today. Thanks. So my question here for Zian, can you tell us a little bit about what working at Amazon AWS is like, and kind of what your day-to-day is like, and if a student were interested in going that path, how would they do that?
Of course. So, at AWS, many people will tell you it's long hours, and I think probably similar to you as well. So if you ask me my day-to-day, probably will be like 16, 18 hours is very common. So my job, what I do is really making sure that any strategic deals, before they go to the CEO, that I'm reviewing them and making sure it makes sense. So I just simplifying this for you, because if I tell you I'm an approver for strategic deals, what does that mean, right? So making sure that when it comes to the CEO, that he will not ask questions, because if he asks questions, that means I didn't do my job. They probably say, why did we let this through, right? Kind of very similar, probably what Mike was explaining. It's like you have to review, you have to ask questions from the salespeople. Why does this make sense? Why is it this net margin? Why these business terms? So I need to make sure that the package is, 100% watertight, making sense before I send it up to the CEO for, his approval or signature. And that's kind of a little bit my job. As I mentioned, it's long hours, also very unpredictable hours, meaning that sometimes a deal comes in at 5 o'clock and says, it's urgent, I needed it yesterday, can you do it now? That means I probably will work until like very late that day, or weekends. That's absolutely very normal. So that's kind of very high intensity, long hours of work, and really kind of cringing. Oh my god, this sounds so familiar. I think if you want to go for Amazon or Amazon Web Services is, of course, the role that I'm doing is sales supporting function, what we call, and in anything revenue related means you have very unpredictable hours. If that's what you like, go for it. There are a lot of other jobs as well that may not necessarily need that intensity. But, like me, you know me, Zane works at AWS. Go on LinkedIn, connect with me. You go on the Amazon website or Amazon Web Services, you see an opportunity, ask me, do a referral. It's as simple as that. But you do need to put the work in yourself by going to the website, find an opportunity for yourself. Do not come to me by saying like, is there a job opening at Amazon or AWS? That is not, I'm not doing that for you. So that's what I can tell you is like, do the work and make it easy for when you're reaching out to people for help or doing the referral.
Thank you so much for repeating it. I don't know. Oh, go for it, yeah.
Amazon Web Services. Yeah, so Amazon Web Services, it's part of Amazon, and they're focusing on cloud computing. So anything that's going to the cloud nowadays, what you see, that's what Amazon Web Services does. And it's pretty much currently the cash cow, meaning earning most of the money for Amazon. Go ahead.
So, I've heard that Amazon workers don't have like union rights. How is that then?
I love that question. I love your courage. So first of all, Amazon and Amazon Web Services are very different. Amazon is really focusing on retail delivery, that we always like go on the website and order our stuff through. What I'm doing is more the infrastructure, cloud computing, they're very, very different kind of, how would I say, like entities. But good question. I love that. I wish I could kind of answer that for you.
Thank you so much for both of the questions. Ken, I was kind of wondering.
I saw your hand.
I was wondering what your day-to-day work experience was like at Google, and now that you are the co-founder of a startup in the AI, how has your day-to-day changed? In addition, I was wondering what advice you would give to high school or college students who either want to go to Google or separately want to do their own startup.
Oh, wow, okay, a lot of questions. So,
and you take your time.
yeah, for sure. When I was at Google, I was there for 8 years, and I was in the role of a product manager. What a product manager does is you work with the engineering team, you're kind of like the project leader with the engineering team, and you launch products together. So things like Google Maps, Google Chrome, Google Search are all powered by all these little teams of one product manager with a small number of engineers. And I mean, really at any big tech company, as well as any startup, the two main functions are you're either building a product or you're selling a product. When I was at Google, I was primarily focused on building the product. And when you're building the product, your life is like, your entire job is like one long high school or college group project. So what that means is like, okay, we're trying to build an app to do X. What do we need? What do we need to do? We come up with a plan. What are all the features that go into it? Who's going to be responsible for talking to the users? Who's going to be responsible for drawing the design? Who's going to be responsible for putting it all up? So everyone has these tasks, you divvy them up, and you launch it, and you see, oh, did people like it? If they liked it, let's build more of it. If they didn't like it, maybe let's not do anything like that in the future. What did we learn from that? So basically, when you work at a big tech company, your life is just like a series of projects, but the difference maybe is that like you get to work with just really smart people. I think one of the best reasons to go into big tech is all of your colleagues are like your smartest classmates. And so it's really a pleasure to work with people that you can learn from. Now that I work in a startup, I'm responsible for both building and for selling the product. So what we'll notice is that as a startup, I'm still the same person, but my role is broader. And so one thing you might be deciding between a big tech job and a startup is in big tech, they have the best of the best doing this job and that job and that job. And so you get to become like an expert in your, but here's one problem that nobody has been able to solve. But in this big tech company, we're gonna have the best people solving that one very specific problem. Versus in a startup, we have a very small team and we have 100 things to do. So there's no single problem that's gonna be the hardest to solve. Like, I don't have to go figure out how a billion people are trying to see my webpage all at the same time, how that's gonna work. Like, that's a problem that only Google has. I have very common mundane problems, but I have 100 of them. And so if you kind of wanna know, like today, I'm gonna talk to the customer about how they make money. And tomorrow, I'm gonna get on the phone with my lawyers and ask about this like regulation. Or, you know, your job is just very, very different. So on the one hand, you're building products in both places. It's like a group project in both places. In a big tech company, you tend to just focus on becoming an expert in one thing. At a startup, you become a tiny bit of an expert in many, many things. I just want to touch on one quick other thing about what life is like a startup. I mentioned that the two halves are building a product and selling a product. Selling a product is an absolutely critical skill if you're going to go down the startup route. But selling may not be what you think it is. I think we have an image of like a salesperson being extremely charismatic and persuasive and funny. But in reality, salespeople that do really well in the real world are just people who are good at listening. So if you were interested in starting a startup in the future, there's a few things I would advise everyone to do. One is just to get really good at observing people and observing what kinds of problems that they have. But just by observing your classmates, your parents, maybe asking your parents about their jobs, asking your friends' parents about their jobs, you'll start to learn about all these problems that exist and that somehow it has occurred to nobody to solve them. Sometimes they're right in front of you. So that's like skill number one. Skill number two is, to do a project, we all have to actually just at the end of the day do work. And so whatever is your line of work, whether you want to be a salesperson, whether you want to be an engineer, whether you want to be a designer, it's still really important to get really, really good at that line of work. And I think school is one of the best places to do that. So if you're thinking, I'm gonna be an engineer, be the chief technology officer of my startup, school is the best time to just get really good at programming. Learn as many programming languages as possible, do your classes, do projects on the side so you get exposure to tools. Just become a really, really good engineer. And so if you can be observant and also be really good at the single technical skill that you develop, I think that will make you super successful as a startup founder or as someone working in a big tech company equally well.
That's really insightful. Thank you so much, Erin. I appreciate it. Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll ask you a question. So why did you decide to find a startup? I don't think you mentioned it.
Oh, that's a great question. Why did I decide to leave Google and join a startup? Honestly, I didn't think I would. When I was in school, I just assumed I would go work at a big company. My parents worked at big companies. But because I was at Google, a lot of my coworkers were previous startup founders. And when I heard about their stories and what it was like, it was very up and down. It was kind of like a roller coaster, where if you get your first customer, you feel so happy.
but then your first customer doesn't like your product and you feel so sad. But then you sign up your second customer and they love you again. It is a bit of an up and down, but to me it's very fun and exciting. And I think when you work in a normal company, it's very, it's very normal, it's very stable. And I think some people really like that kind of stability. And some people really want kind of a sense of adventure. And for me, when I heard those stories of people starting their companies, I just thought that sounded like so much fun.
Okay, and the second question. Can you teach me how to sell these Los Angeles pancake tickets?
That's a great idea. We will talk afterwards.
That's a good question. Thank you so much. Mike, back to you. I know that you are also into filmmaking as well. So I was wondering why you decided to go into filmmaking and what advice you have for aspiring filmmakers.
So my wife, Tonya, who's actually standing right there, smile. We started a film production company in the 1990s when our children were maybe 3 and 5 years old. And we said, there are no really great stories about Asians in the media. We're either kung fu stereotypes or we are servants, and we really want some positive role models for our children so that when they turn on the TV, go to the movies, they can see themselves in positions of leadership, in positions where they are multidimensional, where there are love interests, and we thought, there's nothing out there in Hollywood that's making these movies and TVs. So we said, well, what can we do? And we decided, okay, let's get into the business of making feature films, even though we knew nothing about how to do this. And like I was saying before, for venture capital, the key is just to get yourself out there and meet people. We just started telling people, look, this is something that we're really passionate about. We want to make feature films of Asian Americans telling our stories so that we're not always seen as foreigners in this country. And it's amazing when you put yourself out there and you start telling people your dreams and your passion, people then come to you and go, oh, I know this person who may be able to help you. And so we ended up partnering with some young producers who have a lot of experience making movies in Hollywood, except they were making regular Hollywood films. And they said, yeah, we would love to make Asian American movies. And so we created a company called Celestial Pictures. And we asked for scripts, and then we started getting various scripts from writers, and we ended up making 3 feature films. It was really exciting and creative. The difficulty in doing independent filmmaking is actually not making the film, because there's a lot of talent out there, and there's actually capital, but it's actually how to get it into the theater. And so the theaters are so packed with big movie productions that come out of the studios that they have no room for a small independent movie about Asian Americans. And so our biggest hurdle was to convince the movie theaters to actually screen our movies. If you're interested in filmmaking, it is the barrier to entry has really dropped, because when we were doing this in the 90s, there was no YouTube. There was no social media, there's no Instagram, and so you actually have to make a whole feature film and try to get it into the theater. Whereas now, you can actually relatively inexpensively make movies, short form, videos, use AI particularly AI in making entertainment, and get it out there. And so, at the core of filmmaking and entertainment is a story. So the best way to get into making movies, making short form, long form, is to come up with a great story. And so to me, the best way to do that is you have to learn how to create great stories. And that is through good writing. You're going to get that in college. Writing courses will really help you understand what is the structure of a good story. How do you make a 3-part play? how do you every great story has to have some form of transformation, some form of conflict resolution. It's less like creating music. There's a structure to creating music that as you learn from music instructors and you want to write music, you kind of follow that format. And it's the same way with writing stories. So take writing courses, develop a great story, put it out there in some short form so that people can see it. And then if people get interested, you can, start raising capital to make movies. So.
Thanks so much, Mike. Any questions about filmmaking? Yeah, go for it.
If you don't mind me asking, which films did you make?
Yeah, so the debut, I don't know if you've come across that, that's actually, I think it's on Netflix. It's a coming of age Filipino movie. It's the first one that was made. There's another one called Restless, which was a co-production in China. It's a love story. Yeah, the debut. With Dante Bosco. And the Bosco, so he was in Hook, if you guys have seen Hook. And also American Needs, which is also another movie. So we made three. And it was really interesting and exciting, and we had a lot of fun with it.
Awesome. Was there another question? Okay, I saw that here. No? Okay. Vic, I wanted to ask you, I know that a lot of us in our lives, particularly, when we're in high school, college, and starting our job, there's going to be some sort of gatekeeper there. And I was wondering, over the course of your career, what advice do you have for us when we're trying to ask for something we want? Maybe that might be a raise, a promotion, something along those lines. And in addition, how do you develop a good relationship with your gatekeeper?
I guess I had a couple of gatekeepers, and they were.
I did me to define what I mean. Oh, okay. So basically, like your boss, if you're like, I really want a raise. How am I supposed to ask my boss for a raise? He's supposed to tell you how.
I feel like we use gatekeeper in a different sense now.
Oh, maybe I'm old.
Like if you're keeping an opportunity away from someone, like in school or something, then you're like, why are you gatekeeping?
Well, you should get to know that person better too. Then maybe they'll gatekeep from you.
Yeah, generally your gatekeepers. As you work in a large firm, that's in the context of my first career. There are people above you who are your superiors, your managers, your bosses, essentially. And then there are people that are your peers. So I, along the way, will develop and did develop relationships with all of them. But the big ones are the guys that are above you. I think one of the skills that is always helpful as you go along in your life is to be a little bit of a risk taker. And so if you were passed up for a promotion or you wanted that raise and didn't get it, to me, common sense dictates that you ask why. So early on in my career, I think you have to do it respectfully. If you're really upset or disappointed, I think you have to kind of push that aside and just ask the question. But I found that when you ask a tough question of people, number one, they generally are very open or sympathetic to what you're asking. And even if they're not, they're always going to be pretty respectful. And you planted the seed right away that there's something they can do for you, right, or that you need help. So I have dozens of stories I could probably tell that exemplify that. But don't be afraid to just step forward and just do it in a very calm, friendly way.
Thank you so much, Vic. That's awesome. So I think we have time for one more question from us, and then I'll open it up to the audience. Tian, I wanted to ask you, since you work in AI tech, What should a high school or college student do right now if they wanted to have a career in the AI space? And what would you suggest they do to kind of make themselves like a unique candidate when they're looking for that first job in the AI space?
Ooh, great question. I think I'm gonna try to answer from the perspective of like a technical role, since I think if you're looking to work in marketing or in HR, it actually is roughly the same in most companies. But if you're looking to be an engineer, a builder of AI products, there's actually one type of person that is really, really hard to come by these days on the market, and I think that was gonna be true. It is someone who is both an incredibly talented engineer who can build on stuff, and who has the mathematical framework for doing AI. Because AI is it's like running a bunch of experiments. Like try a bunch of things, can you get to 95% accuracy, 99% accuracy? You have to run a bunch of statistics on it. And it's really rare to get both of those skill sets. Today, when we hire a lot of candidates for an AI role, many of them have gone to school for AI or data science. And so I'm sure they are experts in analyzing how these models perform. But in the reality is that in most places, most companies are not going to be developing cutting-edge AI models. Most companies are going to be using existing AI models developed by somebody else to solve a real-world problem. My company, we do documentation for nurses. And so we use products by OpenAI, for example. And so what we need are actually people who are engineers who can build what the mobile app looks like for nurses, but then integrate a piece of AI directly into the mobile app. And so when we interview folks with an AI background, they aren't able to write regular code, like go into a mobile app and write code. And similarly, you might think like, oh, if I spend all my time doing software engineering, then maybe I won't understand AI. The flip though is that nowadays, as AI gets more and more sophisticated, it becomes a lot easier for anybody to program using AI. So like 10 years ago, if you wanted to be an AI person, you really had to go into that field specifically. But nowadays, most software engineers can pick it up because the tools have made it so easy. So I guess, coming back to like what would I do today, is I would actually focus on being a really, really good software engineer, and then taking a few classes, getting a bit of exposure on the side, where you understand some of the statistics, but that part tends to be much easier, and being just generally an excellent software engineer is actually what I would focus on.
Thank you so much. That's a really good answer. And I wanted to thank all the panelists. Thank you so much for spending the time coming today. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for any of us or any combination of us? Any questions at all? Yeah, go for it.
If any of you guys remember, what was your toughest interview question? Or the most memorable one? That you gave or received? Or maybe you guys don't.
That's a long time ago for me too.
I think one time, when I was interviewing out of college, the guy just looked at me and said, "Why should we hire you?" And right there, I kind of decided, I don't want to work for this. So I just gave him the short response, saying, "Why shouldn't you?"
Thank you. Yeah, back then.
For Tian, by becoming a better software engineer for everyone, wouldn't that just lead to oversaturation of the field already that's being oversaturated within the technology sphere?
That's a great question. This question of oversaturation, like, do we have too many software engineers? Is there too much AI? And I think if you look at the technology cycle, 2005, 7, 09-ish, that was when mobile phones exploded onto the scene. And it took years for mobile technology to be used in every part of the economy. Maybe initially there were kind of some like obvious use cases, like hailing an Uber from your phone. But it took a long time for mobile to become so pervasive. And I think even back then, nobody, when the iPhone first launched, nobody imagined how phones would be so integral to our lives. And I think the same is true in AI. You know, there's a lot of hype in the news about like, oh, there's AI everywhere, but I think we're actually at the very beginning of AI being actually very And so that's part one of the question, of the answer, which is like, we're just at the very beginning. Part two of the answer is that you would not believe how there are a lot of people who have the job of being a software engineer, they've done that work, but the quality varies a ton. And if you can hire someone who's really, really good, it is so worth the money. Those people make so much money because one person who is really good, who can hold a lot of information in their head, is going to be as productive as like a team of 5 people who they can only each do a narrow thing, and there's all this time wasted communicating. And so just by being at the very top of the field, there is always going to be a ton of opportunity there.
Awesome. Any other
So,
questions?
Matt, I'm trying to understand when the newer generations ask them questions, what are they really looking for? So, one other thing that I want everyone to remember as well, there might be a lot of engineers nowadays, right? Everyone wants to be an engineer, big money. But what I do notice around me, like my friends and whatnot, who are engineers, they tend to create and have amazing ideas, create products, but the adoption of that product or idea is very low. So I think if you are wanting to become an engineer, what you really need to remember is to make sure that it's not about whether you think it's a great idea. It's solving, your audience problem. So with anything you do, you really have to understand who's your audience. Am I solving a problem? The same thing when you go to an interview. I don't think what you would like to know is like, what are the most, hard questions? What you want to do is really, really prepare. And by preparing is like, go on, the company's website, understand what that company is about, understand what is their 5 to 10 year track of their, strategy and vision, where do we want to go, right? And what can you bring to the table? So if you have an old at crap, then pretty much, sorry, was it Victor? Vic, where he said like, if someone asks me why should I hire you, he said, well, I can solve this problem for you. Right? So that's kind of really where you need to prepare yourself and understand, what are people looking for, what the company looking for, what's the need out there. So that whether it's that your interview question, or whether it's like, oh my God, the market is just saturated with all those engineers. How do I stand out? And I think by standing out for the engineers, really, really knowing, not that you can create a product, but where you can solve this problem in a very easy way, and your product is very easy to use.
Does that make sense? I thought that was really insightful. It's kind of like you really need to know the problems that your potential employer has, and if you just tailor your whole interview prep to solving the problems or figuring out a way to do it, you'll be a pretty strong candidate. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I think my answer to that is, what was the best interviewee I ever had for a job? This person came into my office and said, I've already done research on your firm, to your point. I know the kind of deals that you like to do. In fact, there are 2 deals that I think you should look at. And I thought, wow, that separated that candidate from anybody else who came into my office, because normally people come in and say, oh, tell me about your firm, or tell me the opportunities. They haven't done any research on what we do. And for that person to actually come in and say, not only have I done research, but I think I can be of service to you right away, demonstrated to me that this person is actually already taking the job. Almost like, I already know what the job is, and I'm going to do it for you. And let me demonstrate for you how I'm going to behave. That by far blew me away. And that was like, wow. Only one person in my whole life has ever done that. And so I would say, really think about that when you go into a job.
Let's just all pile on to this one. What Mike said, the only thing I'd add to it is, I think that philosophy in general, you apply to everything in life, is going to be extraordinarily useful. If your purpose as you go about things is to solve problems for people, whatever that situation is, it will take you very, very far. Not just interview specific.
Thank you. That's awesome. Any other question? Maybe time for one more? Yeah, go for it.
I have a question for Jan. What do you think are like the most important extracurriculars or activities that helped you get into
just want to make sure I heard your question. What is the most important extracurricular activity to get into the medical field? Is that right?
Oh, what do you think?
Oh, what do I think is the most important extracurricular?
How
Is that-
do you get into
Oh, help me get into the medical field. Okay, that's a good question. And also, I'm so impressed with everyone here. Such an ambitious group. Let's see. I actually started off as a writer, publishing, academic publishing, textbook publishing, before I made a career switch. And I didn't know I wanted to work in the medical field, but I did an internship at the Cancer Center, and I loved it. I loved working with patients. I loved helping them when they were going through something that was so unknown and scary, and just feeling like they weren't alone. And I still remember all of those first patients I worked with them when they got their diagnosis to remission. And when I made the switch to hospice, it absolutely changed my life. I would say getting into the medical field, an internship, meeting somebody, or talking to someone who works in medical field right now. Dr. Kwong is like the friendliest, nicest doctor you will ever meet. He's so down to earth. And he's also our clinical medical director, but you can ask him anything. Because people in the medical field really care. So ask anyone that you know what helped them get started. And I'm happy to answer questions after the Q&A as well.
Thank you, that's awesome. And I can kind of help answer a little bit of that too. I would say if I were to apply to medical school again, I think the key is to have a really good narrative for yourself. Think about how all the things that you do create kind of the person that you are, and also how that can be attractive to the medical schools that you're applying to. So for me, during the time, I found that kind of my niche was, I'm very interested in helping the elderly. So I definitely wanted my whole kind of outreach to be about that. And I'm also interested in business, right? So kind of finding extracurriculars that kind of were similar to that. And then also kind of in my personal statement, I wrote a pretty strong personal statement to kind of show how those two come together. And because of that, I was really able to stand out, right? If you try to find a medical school, you'll be competing with people that are really smart. And there's sometimes just some people say, wow, how do you even tell yourself apart? But what I realized was when I went into the interviews, I was really a one-of-one candidate. Nobody else really had the same story that I did, and that really helped me get into medical school. So I would think about what about your interest is unique, and how we can apply that to healthcare. In general, but also think about when you're actually a doctor, how can that be helpful to other people? So that was a good time. Great, thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, thanks. We'll in the back. Actually, can we take a picture first? Hold on. Do you want to look? We can take a picture and then you guys are on the background.